All right, good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, September 8th, 2025. It is 7:32, and we're here at the Newbury Municipal Offices at 12 Kent Way in Byfield. This is the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. I'm Eric Spahn, the chair. We have Chrissy Beaupre, who is our administrative assistant. We have Mario Carnavale, who's a member. We have Michelle Wheeler, who's an associate member, Jack Kelly, who's a member, Larry Murphy, who's our liaison from the planning board, and we have Larry Costa here from town council. So, with that, Mario, you want to?
Sure. All right, first up is Mark Ferrari, Ringco Realty LLC, represented by attorney Jeff Rolfs, 2 Plum Island Boulevard. The applicant is requesting a special permit finding for relief from sections 97-4D4, change of non-conforming use, and 97-4D2, allowed use. B, single family dwelling dimensional regulations, 0.3 max floor area ratio, and 4 lot coverage of the Newbury zoning bylaws, and any other permit relief as may be required under the town of Newbury zoning bylaws to allow the proposed project in order to redevelop the project, the raising of all existing structures, removal of existing pavements and equipment, and the construction of 1 building with 2 residential townhomes with parking underneath of the property located at 2 Plum Island Boulevard, Newbury, Mass. 01951, Assessors Map U02, Lot 132. The applicant's representative has submitted supplemental information on the project, now proposing 1 building with 2 residential dwellings with parking underneath the building, continuing from 4, 7, 515, 612, and 717, 25. Applicants submitted supplemental information on the project as requested at the last hearing.
All righty. Good evening.
Good evening. Ready for me?
Ready for you.
Okay, thank you. For the record, Jeff Roloff's attorney for the applicant. I'm going to give you just a quick update as to where we've been since our last meeting in July. And then I'm going to go over the materials that we recently submitted. So in terms of an update, our last hearing was on July 17th. Shortly after that, we submitted the slides that we had presented and discussed that evening, so those are part of your record. On August 5th, we met with the Conservation Commission. That meeting was quickly continued by the Commission. They did not want to proceed with any substantive review. While this process was still pending, they really were pretty clear about wanting the ZBA to act first on this project. So they continued their meeting to September 2nd. We then submitted a supplemental package to this board on August 14th. And what we tried to do there was to submit exactly what the board asked for in July. That package, which I'm going to go through in more detail, but that included a historic compilation related to the history of the restaurant here, a legal memo, proposed special conditions, and an outline of the sort of factors to be considered by the board to meet the applicable legal standard. I'll get into those materials in a minute. On August 19th, we met, Steve Sawyer, our civil engineer, met with James Surratt, DPW director, to review the proposed public improvements. And his response generally, he's confirmed this in an email, but was he likes the improvements that we're proposing in the public land, the town-owned land adjacent to the project site. He requested one change. We had proposed a sort of wooden boardwalk for the walkway. He really wants that to be asphalt. So that's subject to Concom approval, but that's a detail that we've tweaked in the plans that have been submitted to you. On August 26th, we met with the select board. That was initiated because as part of the Conservation Commission process, we needed to get the town's consent to include the proposed improvements on the town land as part of that process. So the question to them was, will you consent to us filing the notice of intent with the commission to also cover those activities? And generally, the select board was favorable. They supported the request they approved their consent for the NOI process encompassing those activities. And I wasn't there, but my understanding was that they also generally expressed support for the improvements that are currently proposed within that town-owned land. I will just remind this board, though, that we still would need to get town approval separate from ZBA and Concom approval to actually implement the work that's proposed on the town-owned land. Yep,
So I was present at the select board meeting.
okay, great.
Yeah, confer what you just mentioned in short.
Okay, thank you. We then met with the Conservation Commission on September 2nd. The scope of that meeting really was narrow. They wanted to take up the question of whether or not peer review was warranted or still warranted given the revisions that we made to the project. They ultimately decided that peer review was not warranted. They expressed general support for all the revisions that we've made to this project. They continued the hearing to September 16. So that's our substantive review and discussion with them. And again, they did that because they want the ZBA to make a decision before they get into it. On September 4th, Steve Sawyer submitted revised plans to you, very minor revisions. The plans included an updated site plan, which you see here. You should have copies of that, and an updated landscape plan. The only changes to this plan from what was submitted in July was there's a notation on there with respect to the walkway that it's going to either be boardwalk or bituminous asphalt, depending on town and Concom approval. They also split the patio that had been proposed on the south side of the building. It had been a 20 by 20 foot patio, 400 square feet. They broke that up into two patios, one on each side of the building, 10 by 10. So the overall patio size actually was reduced, but it's two smaller patios instead of one. And then they added up some vegetation along Sunset Drive. So again, super minor changes. Basically, the site plan is otherwise the same as what you've seen since July. Okay, now I'd like to go back to our August 14th submittal to this board. And I just want to walk through each of those pieces, most of them really quickly because, and I'm happy to get into as much detail as you want. But I want to remind you what was submitted, since that was over a month ago now, or almost a month ago. So one component was this historical compilation, thick bound volume documents. It's basically a compilation of historical references related to the restaurant use of this property. I did most of this work myself. I got to say it was a really sort of interesting task. It's super expensive for my client, unfortunately, but it was interesting to go back to the early 1900s and the 50s and dig through the records to figure out what was going on out here. Registry research, online research. It really was limited in scope to documents that were available online. I had to go to the Newburyport Public Library and Town Hall for some things, but mostly it was just the online stuff. Obviously there's a ton more out there, but even with those limited resources, the compilation that I pulled together demonstrates that this property has been used as a resident prior to the adoption of zoning, and it seems to have been used continuously since then. So there's no indication at any point in time during the history of the operations of this property that the restaurant use was ever abandoned. I also included in this package an affidavit from Mark Friery, who's owned the property since 1999. And that included a number of exhibits related to the litigation that we talked about in July, all the disputes and issues that had come up at that point. And all aspects of that, I think, also support the view that the restaurant use, as it's been operated most recently, 125-seat restaurant, is a lawfully pre-existing restaurant use, fully protected by the PIAF provisions, grandfathering provisions. So that's the historical compilation. I'm not going to walk through it, but if you're interested in the history, it's definitely worth perusing.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Here on this? So
Yep.
I would say job well done. This is what was expected. I think although it was laborious to do and probably costly, it does save everybody the understanding where if someone from the outside wanted to challenge the one thing of use, where your structure is your structure after 10 years, but the use could be challenged, proves it out. So
Okay.
I'm happily satisfied by the documentation and the effort that's presented in here.
Okay, thank you.
I have one question.
Yep.
It was two properties that were bisected towards the point of the intersection, and then the property lines changed at some point.
Yeah, I think it was 1958. There was a survey plan in 1958 that changed the original subdivision in the early 1900s. So when these two lots at the intersection were first created, that's page number 1 of the compilation, there was a subdivision plan for the Plum Island Beach Company. You're probably familiar with that. That's how all these lots were created originally. In 1958, which is on page 9, there was a subdivision plan done, which actually changed the boundaries of those two lots. They had been lots 1 and 2. They changed them to lots A and B. And I thought it was interesting that on lot A, which is the current configuration of the parcel at issue, they also showed the restaurant. They showed the same building that was there at the time. And it totally matches up with the old photographs that we have of that Thunderbird restaurant. So, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. The other document we submitted was a legal memorandum, and we submitted this for 2 reasons. One was just to provide an overview of the legal standard here. Most of the findings, legal standard that you usually apply here is the basic finding of whether or not the proposed changes are substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood and the PIOD. So being more detrimental is okay, but if it's substantially more detrimental, then you lose your authority to approve these things. That's your basic, that's your usual finding standard. In this case, where we're going under a different section of the PIOD provision, subsection 4, the change in the use has a less detrimental term associated with it. So the change in uses from one nonconforming use to another nonconforming use has to be in the direction of less detrimental. So I discussed those 2 legal points and standards in my memo. I then went on to discuss the powers test, and that was partly because Lisa Mead had raised it before. We talked about it at the last meeting. It's a set of law that's out there related to these nonconforming uses and structures. And I discussed it. She thought it was most relevant to the question of what is the baseline for your comparing the proposed use. What are you comparing the proposed use to? Is it the most recent restaurant use, 125 seat, or is it some earlier version? And the powers test kind of gets to that issue. So I discussed that in the memo. The conclusion is there's nothing that in the law or in the facts that we compiled that would suggest that the baseline for you to compare the proposed use to is anything but the 125 seat restaurant that's been there for the last 20 plus years.
In terms my wife could understand.
Yes.
If the use had grown or expanded at some point beyond its allowed, then we might think back to a different time and use that as the judgment point.
That's correct. So that gets exactly to the baseline issue, yes.
Yeah, and I would think, I would think we're comparing it to what's there and what was the current restaurant size, shape, and flavor of
it. I'm going to save sort of the juiciest one for last. So the other thing we submitted were proposed standards, proposed special conditions. So in all of your decisions, you've got your sort of classic standard set of conditions. And I've read through those. They all make sense. In some situations, you've got special conditions that you attach because every case is a little bit different. So we had proposed 2 special conditions. I did send copies of this over to Lisa and Adam's office. And you should have copies of those. Sorry, I'm just looking because I thought I had them in front of me, and I don't. Give me 1 second. I do not, but I do remember the 2 conditions. Thank you. So what we were trying to do here was to assure the board that our representation of making certain improvements and accepting certain conditions was valid, and we wanted you to bind us to the representations we made with respect to these items. So the first special condition related to the on-site and off-site public improvements. So the language that I provided defines what those are, and they include on-site, the offer to grant an easement to the town for a portion of the public walkway along Sunset Drive, and also to construct all of the improvements that we've been discussing in the town-owned right-of-way adjacent to the properties, approximately 3,200 square feet of area. And what we're clarifying through the language we propose is that prior to implementing these, the applicant has to secure all other permits and approvals necessary for that work. We don't want you or anyone else to think that your approval gives us the authority we need to go do that stuff. There are other approvals we need. Number two, clarifying that if during the process of getting those other approvals, if there are any material changes to the work, that we may have to come back to you. And I've defined sort of who makes that decision. It's the building commissioner, DPW director. Ultimately, if there's any question, we come to the board. We would present to you the changes from what you've seen through our process here. And if they're really significant, then we'd renotice a hearing and consider them at a hearing. And then finally, a commitment that, or a requirement in this proposed condition that the improvements be completed prior to issuance of an occupancy permit for the first unit. So those tie into the public improvements and bind us to what we've represented during the process. The second special condition relates to the deed restrictions that we proposed. One of them included a prohibition of enclosing the open porches that we've presented in our designs. And two, prohibiting construction of buildings or structures other than garden structures within the two view corridors that are defined in our plans. And the timing of those, as laid out in my proposed conditions, is that those restrictions have to be finalized and recorded at the registry prior to issuance of an occupancy permit for the first townhouse unit at the property, with the final language being subject to review and approval by the building commissioner and your town council. So those are the special conditions. I haven't heard, we did provide those to town council, I haven't heard from them, but those are in front of you for your consideration. The last document was something that, Mr. Chairman, you requested at the last meeting, and I think it was really what we interpreted it as bring together all the factors that you think support a finding, the less detrimental or substantially, not substantially more detrimental findings that you have to make as part of this, the finding that we're requesting. So we've submitted an outline that looks like this, that we labeled as less detrimental and far considerations. And it really is organized in that sequence. It's all the factors that we think support the finding that we're looking for. I'm going to walk through those quickly. And then following that, we focus on the FAR, because the FAR and the nonconformity with the FAR as related to this project is the one factor that cuts against the finding that we're asking for, but we think it's fully mitigated. So with respect to the less detrimental factors, I'm just going to walk through this document. I'm not going to read through it, but just highlight a few things. Number one, the project would result in the removal of the restaurant use impacts. And those are obvious. We discussed them earlier. Commercial lighting, solid waste storage and disposal, traffic and parking activities, deliveries and pickups, noise, frequent ongoing maintenance and management issues, ongoing burden to town services, inspectional, public safety services, etc. And then the water and sewage usage, which is directly related to the PIOD provisions. The second category is just an overview of how this project advances the intent and purposes of the PIOD provisions. So I went to the bylaw. What are the purposes that the PIOD provisions are seeking to accomplish? And we describe here how this project advances those purposes. Number three, we highlight the reduced water and sewage use. You'll remember that this property has the benefit of 3 sewer betterment connections, the fees having been paid. The history on that is that commercial uses, even though they might have used more water than 3 residential units, the maximum number any commercial use was allocated was 3 units. But in this case, this property's been using more water and sewage than a 3-unit facility. The proposed use is only for 2 residential units, even though the property has the benefit of three betterments. Number 4, reduced number of parking spaces. Historically, there have been spaces for 42 vehicles on site and at the on site, plus the adjacent parking spaces that were dedicated within the town-owned land for this restaurant, reduced to the 6 units that we're proposing. Number 5, reduced parking visibility. The parking spaces associated with these 2 units will be under the building and out of sight. Improved public safety. Again, as compared to the restaurant parking, which was in and out all around this building, we're proposing 1 shared driveway with turnaround room within the property so vehicles can exit the property coming forward, not backing into traffic. Number 7, significant reduction in the impervious surfaces. An expansion of the pervious open space areas. Currently, 71% of the lot is covered by building structures, decks, and other impervious surfaces. The proposed project brings that 71% down to 27%, significant reduction. And I'll highlight that's more a Conservation Commission issue. But it also gets to, if you read the PIAD purposes, I think 2 of the stated purposes are specifically related to addressing flooding impacts on the island. And that goes a long ways to doing that, as well as the reduced building coverage. So the proposed project represents a reduction in building coverage from 35% to 24%. Number 9, the compliant improved setbacks from adjacent properties. This property has 2 residential properties adjacent to it. On the south side, the current setback is 34.5 feet. The proposal will reduce that to 30 feet, but that's still, as you know, 3 times the 10 feet that's required. The proposed building will be on the Plum Island Boulevard side of the property. The existing setback is 8.5 feet, and this project, the proposed building, will be 23 feet off of that side setback. The front setback will be reduced will be expanded from 3.2 feet to 7.6 feet. But obviously more important than that, I think, is the fact that this project proposes significant improvements to that 3,200 square feet in front of the property within the area between the travel lanes and the building itself. Number 11, building height. We've really worked hard with Scott Brown, who's here this evening, if you have any questions, to minimize the height of this structure. As you know, the elevation is required by code. Only a few inches of the proposed elevation from ground to the bottom of the first floor. Only a few inches of that is to accommodate the height of a person walking under there so we can park down there. Most of it is required by the building code. There's nothing we can do about it. It's not a situation like those properties on the primary dune where they can actually build lower to the ground. By code, they could build closer to the sand, but they often don't want to, but they could by code because the base at flood elevation is actually below the ground surface when you're out near the primary dune. But here the height's driven primarily by that, and then Scott's done everything he can to keep the height of the building down. So in the end, what we're proposing is a 30.8 foot building height as it's calculated under the bylaw. That's lower than most of the buildings that have been constructed out here most recently. The top height, and I think this goes to really the sort of visual impact of this building, because Scott's using a low roof pitch, the top height of the ridge is 34.2 feet. So even the top of the building is below the 35-foot height allowed by the zoning bylaw. Number 12, on-site public improvements. We talked about that easement and the walkway that's proposed. 13 are the off-site improvements that we've discussed at length. 14, improved flood control just as a result of elevating the building and restoring all these coastal dune features on-site and off-site. Number 15, the compatible 2-family residential use. And the points we make there are, if you were to compare the proposed 2-family use to a sort of reconstructed restaurant that meets the code, which would have to then be elevated and have walkways and ADA compliance and everything else. We think that this project would have less impact to the neighborhood than that project. Similarly, with respect to an as-of-right single-family use, we believe this project would also be similar or favorable to a single-family use that's completely unregulated. A single-family use, if it's not regulated in the way that this project is probably going to be higher because it could go 35 feet. The setbacks are going to probably be less, so they may keep the FAR down, but expand the footprint of the building because they got room to do that with the building coverage and the setbacks that are allowed under the zoning. There would be no design control, and there would be no public improvements associated with the single-family development. Point 16 is just that we think we've come forward with a architectural design that's consistent with the beach style and character of the Plum Island community. Number 17, we proposed the deed restrictions that we talked about previously. And then the FAR considerations, I just want to pause for a second. So we know that the FAR has been like at the core of the board's concerns. So give me 1 second. And then we'll go through these. Okay. The existing building, single story, is non-conforming with respect to FAR, being 27.4%, where 25 is the limit. The proposal, calculated as it's supposed to be under the bylaw, would bring the FAR number up to 41.5%. And the board has had issue with that. Our previous proposal, I think, had numbers in excess of 50%. FAR, so as you're evaluating the project in the context of the legal standard, is the project substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, or is the change in use less detrimental? As you're evaluating the factors and trying to determine what finding is supported here, we acknowledge that FAR is a relevant factor. But it shouldn't be applied independent of all the other factors, and it shouldn't be viewed as a determinative factor by itself, especially where this property is in a unique setting. FAR limits are basically aimed at controlling density, overcrowding, bulk, sort of massing type issues, and the goal being to preserve the visual character of a neighborhood and to protect neighbors. These same impacts are also affected by other project attributes. Building height, setbacks, building coverage, and some of the other requirements we've talked about also affect these same types of impacts that FAR is aimed at controlling. We also wanted to highlight that our view that FAR should not be applied mechanically or just strictly on a numerical basis, and I'm not suggesting you're doing that. I mean, obviously the 25%, you're comparing what we're proposing to what the bylaw allows, but we just wanted to emphasize that in considering FAR in this findings context, it really, we think, should be a qualitative spatial analysis and take all the other factors into account. Not just put too much emphasis on the numerical standard or what's being proposed here. There are buildings that comply with FAR. In fact, buildings that comply very easily with FAR that present themselves on Plum Island with much more sort of bulk and massing than what this project would propose, because every property is different, right? So it depends on where the building is located, what's the height, what are the setbacks, how close are you to the street? All these other factors come into play. So in this case, we've got a unique setting, and we tried to highlight that here so you'd have a chance to understand our perspective on this issue and have it in your record. But the site context here is unique. The property's at an intersection of two roadways. There are only two neighbors, direct neighbors to it. The property's actually set back quite a ways from one of the roadways, Sunset Drive. Across Sunset Drive, there aren't a row of houses or any houses, It's expansive views to the west. So those are unique. It's a unique setting. And these are factors that should be taken into account when you're trying to evaluate the impacts of a non-conforming FAR. The deed restrictions that we propose, we think, affect and mitigate the FAR analysis. So of the calculated FAR for these buildings, 960 square feet of that FAR calculation relates or comes from those open porches. We've proposed the deed restrictions to make sure that they won't ever be, you won't have a future owner coming in here and looking to enclose those. The deed restriction will prevent that. So these are open porches. Many municipalities don't even regulate spaces like this as FAR. You do in Newbury, but the reason some don't is because these open areas don't present themselves, they don't present the extent of massing and bulk issues that an enclosed space might.
Excuse me, can I
Yes.
just ask a question of that? But
Yep.
those open porches are under roofs, correct?
They are. That's why they're counted in the calculation. Yes. And we don't dispute that. It's more, yes, we agree that the FAR that's being proposed is 41.5%. We think that 960 square feet doesn't present the same types of impact issues as the enclosed living spaces do. So if you were to discount those, the number would drop to 34.1%. And then going to the point that this property is situated with this large area between the travel lane of Sunset Drive and the parcel itself, and that we're proposing to improve those. If you were to treat that as if it's part of the lot, which you're not supposed to do in terms of the numerical application, but if you were just putting it into context, that would actually bring the visual impact of this building down to, from a FAR perspective, to 24.6%. So it's just to help with this sort of contextual evaluation. Again, we've proposed deed restrictions to protect the view corridors. We've proposed significant improvements, not only off-site, but even on the property. We situated the building away from Plum Island Boulevard, not just Sunset Drive, but we shifted it to the south, away from Plum Island Boulevard, so we could propose significant vegetative coastal dune-like improvements between the building and the public way on that side of the building. We've done everything we can to reduce FAR to the extent that we can. The improvements that we've proposed, the quality of the building proposed, it doesn't allow us to make further compromises with respect to the living area. It wouldn't be financially feasible to do that, and that's why we haven't come back to you with a further reduction in the size of the living spaces here. And then finally, we'll just point out that, the neighbors that are most impacted, and I don't know if they're here this evening, but you heard them in July. The neighbors most impacted that have been involved with this process were actually generally supportive of the project as it's been revised during this project. I want to just provide to you, this is not new information, it's just a sort of compilation. I should point out that Nick Cracknell came in also. Nick put together just a tabulated cheat sheet of the evaluation factors that relate to the legal standard and the FAR considerations. I'd like to just give it to you, walk through it real quickly. It's nothing new, but it just packages this stuff into one document. I thought it would be helpful to have in the record, if I may. So basically, as I mentioned, this sort of tabulates a lot of the points that we discussed in more detail in that less detrimental and FAR considerations outline that we provided. And it puts a lot of the numbers side by side, existing versus proposed. You saw something similar in the zoning table on Steve's site plan. This elaborates more fully all the factors that we think support the finding that we're asking for. We put in bold the FAR factor, which is, I think, the only part of this project that cuts against that finding, but it's completely mitigated for all the reasons I've mentioned in the outline and tonight, and then we've summarized those at the bottom. The kinds of impacts you're concerned with respect to FAR exceedances, are mitigated by the lower building height, the low roof pitch, the greater setbacks than required, the open porches, the parcel being situated off of Sunset Drive and Plum Island Boulevard with significant improvements between those travel lanes and the buildings, and just the amount of open space that's being restored as part of the project. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to the board unless Nick wanted to supplement anything there, or do you want to just wait and see if they have questions? How you feeling? I don't know when you walked in, so.
I've been here for most of it, but maybe I'll wait and see if they.
Okay, so we'll turn it back to the board. Thank you.
Great, thank you. You guys have any questions? I have nothing.
Just a couple things, and I don't know if it's under our purview either. The on-site and public improvements,
Yes.
based on long-term maintenance, who's going to take care of it? Money in escrow, who says it looks bad, it's worn down, needs to be replaced? Who's accountable for all that?
So the way we propose this is that the person building this, whether it's Mark or a buyer or whatever, is going to be responsible for constructing the improvements within the right-of-way and also within the easement on site. And at that point, the ongoing maintenance is the same as any other public right-of-way. And we've discussed this with James. So that will have to get nailed down in the agreement with the town. But as we're proposing it, it would be applicant constructs it, town maintains it.
Okay.
And the town will have the final say on how that.
Correct.
is written. Right.
That's right.
We're understanding what is being proposed and offered as part of an improvement of the project. Understanding how it relates to all the characters that we typically do if it was part of the site is, I think, how we might consider it. But the town has the legal entity that has to make the final agreement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
My question was about maybe what that area as well.
I have a little bit, but I'd like to wait if I could.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
When you talked to the DPW, was there any mention of crosswalks or a bigger, did the discussion go more to the intersection and Sunset Drive?
Steve Sawyer with Millennium. No, there was no discussion about crosswalks. There's really no opportunity for us. There's nothing, there's no crosswalk across the street. Typically, what happens is people park on the opposite side of Sunset Drive and they just cross. There's no real formal area to cross there. No sidewalk. They cross, and we're just trying to provide a safe passage around the corner to tie into the right. I don't believe there's ability to walk off the roadway as you proceed down towards the beach, but there was no.
So we all know that people park over the bridge where the old bridge was. People park in the muddy strip on the other side, closest to us. They park across the street. So all that traffic, you're setting up a sidewalk, it would be nice if the town had said don't cross here, but cross here kind of thing. And also, I think then to get over to the Sunset Club, people walk on both sides of the road and then all of a sudden they find themselves at the intersection and figure they gotta go do something. So in terms of public safety, I think we might just ask James to consider how the bigger picture might be.
Eric, if you'll recall, at the end of the Board of Selectmen's meeting, Tracy Blaze said to me that what we're doing is very similar to what the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, under a grant funding, proposed to the town to do there for the safety reasons you're outlining.
Right.
And that is effectively a crosswalk from the marsh on Sunset Boulevard way before you get into the intersection. That's why our walkway, and we're carrying the easement, starts way back there. Then when you come around that corner with baby carriages and umbrellas, you're well off the road. And then when you get to the other side of my property going towards the east, I think there currently may be a crosswalk there now, but it would be, the crosswalk would be somewhere around the very end of our property over there, as far away from the intersection as possible. And what Tracy had remarked is that this might allow them to go back to that grant. And that was when we had our dispute over my parking that was put on hold. And this would then allow them to go back to that. I have no idea whether that's going to happen, but that's what Tracy was telegraphing.
I think maybe what I'm saying, and probably should have said first, is that I think I will talk to DPW and James, because I'd like to see the town do their piece to
Yeah.
help the situation. With the corner being improved, it would be a shame for the town not to take the extra step to make sure everybody's safe.
Right.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay, so that was one. Two, I would say by the time you get done, but you might want nice little gates that say private property at the two edges of your to the condo to make sure people aren't like wandering around the
Yeah,
back
right.
side
Yep.
of that. And is it proposed to have a granite curb around the edge, or is it
No granite curbing.
no granite curb?
So there'd be a vegetated strip between the edge of, so the plan is to have a white edge of solid white line for the edge of travel way, and then a 2-foot offset to the edge of pavement, and then a vegetated strip. So no curbing.
Okay.
That facilitates drainage. The sheet flow can drain into the sand in dune grass.
Or just, again, thinking of people seeing where the crosswalk is or where they could step up onto, and if there's a curb and it's planted, then I would hope that people would think that they're not trampling it down to make their own path.
Right.
Okay,
So this project seemed to lend itself to checklists. I know you guys did one, there was one here.
Yep.
You have an itemized list. I did one too. I think most of us probably did. First, I would say it's significant that both of the neighbors, who, as you said, were here a lot, I wouldn't say they enthusiastically supported it, who wants a duplex next to them, but they said they both very clear they preferred it to a restaurant. So there's a mitigating factor. On the checklist that I looked at, which is very similar to the one that you listed, better or worse or even, traffic patterns are better, noise, odor, and nuisance were better. The impact on property value is probably better. Public health and safety better. Environmental impact, water, flooding, erosion, better. Infrastructure, sewer, et cetera, better. The three items that I thought were worse, and I don't think it's a deal breaker, were clearly far. I think we've all acknowledged that. And then the two visual or aesthetic ones, the visual impact with the view. You know, I appreciate that you're trying to save the view corridors, but there's a big difference between a 12-foot-high Cape-looking structure and a 34-foot-high. So that's a hard one to win on. The other one is very similar, but under the Powers test, they call it more aesthetic visual appeal. I know we're not completely going by Powers. And in that case, that one's, you know, I don't know if it fits my vision of a beach house, but my vision doesn't really count. So
our selective vision as provided to us in the bylaws doesn't really count.
right. So with that said, I would say
We kindly suggest sometimes, or we make certain faces at certain things, but what we cannot be criticized for the design character of Plum Island. You know, the spatial and the massing, as we've discussed, we can be, for
Right.
sure. But that's just something to say on the record, because, you know, other towns, if you were in Nantucket,
Oh,
we
yeah.
had a different discussion.
Different altogether,
But we're not.
yep.
so that's about it for me. I think we're tending towards a positive outcome here.
Okay. Any last questions? Is there anyone in the audience here that would like to speak in favor or opposed? You can speak for your own project if you really like. If you're here, if you're here and you're a Newbury
I
resident,
think
you can
everyone will
speak.
take it for granted that I'm in favor.
Last chance to get on the record. Okay. Do you have any, was there any words of wisdom from Lisa, or?
So no, Lisa sort of left it to me. I reviewed all the paperwork that Jeff submitted, all of which he walked through tonight. I don't have anything in particular to say that would contradict the representations he's made. I thought the legal memorandum was nicely done. I did review the proposed conditions that Jeff provided. I thought that those were appropriate. I might suggest some minor tweaks in the wording, just based on past experience representing boards specifically, to ensure that those conditions are enforceable, to ensure that they reflect the reality that they are offerings by the applicant that might typically be beyond your purview if you were to make demands for these sorts of things, like view corridors or deed restrictions. Those are not typically things that ZBAs or planning boards can do as a matter of zoning law, but when they're offered by an applicant and you rely upon those voluntary representations, it's fair to include them as conditions of approval if the condition reflects the fact that they were voluntary concessions or commitments made by the applicant. So I typically like to include language to that effect within the wording of the condition, because often when somebody's reading a decision 5 years from now, 10 years from now, they don't have the benefit of the full record or transcript or the meeting minutes in front of them. But otherwise, I thought the special conditions were nicely done. My only suggestion as you proceed in whatever direction you might be proceeding tonight is to do this in 2 steps, and maybe this is consistent with your past practice or how Lisa's counseled you in the past. I never advise a board, especially in a project of this importance, to simply vote to approve or approve with conditions, try to fashion those conditions verbally on the spot, and then assume that the decision is going to read the way that you want it to read. So usually what we advise our boards to do is when you feel that you're at a point where you're ready to close the public hearing, go ahead and close the public hearing. Decide what you think those conditions of approval might be, if it'll be an approval, or the basis for denial, if it's going to be a denial. Flesh those out, advise me what those conditions might be or what those grounds might be. I can take notes, you can take notes. And then ultimately what I think you should vote upon in the first instance would be to instruct council or to instruct the chair, subject to review by council, to draft an approval with conditions of denial, whatever it's going to be, for your review at your next meeting. And then ultimately when you do finally vote to grant the approval or to deny the project, you'll be doing so with a full and complete decision before you that'll be fleshed out and ready for prime time, and then you can file it literally the next day.
So we have been taking steps to improve ourselves every time, and certainly our decisions have greatly improved with Chrissy here at the helm. And Lisa has counseled us on that before, and certainly since the 40B project, I think is when we actually asked town council to draft the first decision for us, and have taken advantage of that several times since. So appreciate you clearly outlining all that again for us. That's good. So in all the other departments have procedures and standards, whether it's planning board, whether it's Concom, DPW, obviously they've had an open relation and discussion, and the select board in terms of what they will need to do. Is there a precedent for that in town? Is this, how do we, if this, a key piece of this moving forward is predicated on the corner and the assumption that that's all in favor and doable and can come to some terms and agreement and be bound back in to make sure that it happens.
Sure.
So as we debate or understand it or see the merits of that, how does it actually legally get done? And do you know that process?
Or does it get done, right? So it's a fair question. I'm glad that you asked it, because as I was reading through it, I mentioned some potential tweaks in the wording. When I was reading through proposed special condition 1, which is the one that speaks to the on and off-site improvements, I've drafted conditions like this many times for boards before, often in the Chapter 40B context, where commitments will be made to realign an intersection or to install a traffic light or things along those lines that are off-site improvements. They obviously require approval from different departments, boards, commissions, committees, most often from the select board, just to grant a license to do work within the public right-of-way, to say nothing of MassDOT approvals or whatnot that are sometimes required with those more comprehensive mitigation conditions. the challenge that faces boards like yours, ZBAs, planning boards, is you can only take action on what's within your purview. So you can't grant the permission to access the right of way. That permission comes from the select board. You can't grant permission to do public works that are within the purview of your Department of Public Works. And so you can condition it the way that Jeff has suggested here. I think it's well worded, where there is a statement that the applicant has proposed improvements. It goes on to describe what those improvements are. And then there was language here to some effect, and I'm looking for it, that indicated that it was going to be prior to implementation of public improvements, the applicant, property owner, and their successors and assigns shall secure all necessary and required approvals for such work. And then it says in parentheses, e.g. Conservation Commission order of conditions, street opening permit, Board of Selectmen approval. So that's fine. But then the question becomes, but what happens if those things don't issue? What if the select board doesn't issue its approval? Now, we don't think that's gonna happen. We think the select board will be in favor of improvements at the applicant's cost within the public right of way. But what if that doesn't happen? What if the Conservation Commission looks at the project and says, the select board has said they'll only approve it if the sidewalk is bituminous asphalt, and yet we're not comfortable with that impervious surface. We're gonna demand that it be the wooden planks that were originally proposed. Now you have a stalemate between the two boards, and so what happens? And particularly what happens when you're basing your decision, arguably, on this mitigation being part of the basis for you reaching the conclusion that this project will not be substantially more detrimental than the existing non-conforming use. If this is of that much importance to you, that this is a basis for the decision, how do you assure yourself that that gets done? And so I think the one potential tweak you could make to this condition, I like the concept of, in the event that the project gets modified, by the project I mean the project improvements within the right of way, the off-site improvements, to the extent that those get changed in such a way that their material changes, Jeff has proposed that if they're minor, they can be administratively approved. If they're more significant, they would come back to you. Well, maybe what we also incorporate is, in the event that the permits and approvals that are required to be obtained from the select board or DPW or whomever, Conservation Commission, can't be obtained, well then in that instance, the applicant also has to come back to you to discuss an alternative mitigation plan. Because otherwise, they're gonna say, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We understand your condition said we have to do this, but we're being told by the selectmen, or we're being told by the Conservation Commission that we can't do it. So what are we supposed to do? We can't proceed if your other municipal boards, commissions, committees, departments are not giving us the go-ahead.
Yeah, I would think from the conversations that you've all reported that most people understand what's going on here. The question is that we always like to make sure that if it's someone else's governance, that we just clearly say that, right? And we're not trying to allude in a decision, typically in a favorable decision, that we're granting anything more than what exactly is in the bylaw for zoning.
Right.
So, and I guess with that, we're always, and I guess we haven't really had it where we've had decisions that have gone, we've had some decisions that the applicant never took action on, but we've never had a decision that got really screwed up and was sort of halfway there, and then all of a sudden there was bigger issues of stuff that's outside everybody's context that we just hopefully don't want to get to. So if we set it up correctly and everybody has the right understanding, then everything should go smoothly. Because the language is in place to make sure everybody's aware of what needs to happen.
I do tend to see fewer hiccups when it's all within municipal government, when you're talking about the select board has to give the okay, or the Conservation Commission has to give the okay. Often I'm crafting these conditions, as I alluded to before, where it's the Massachusetts Department of Transportation has to issue some sort of highway access permit. And what happens if that doesn't issue? That's beyond your control.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we don't run into any of that.
No, I deal with it every day.
Right.
And the MBTA and MassDOT all at the same time, so we don't want to go there.
Right.
Okay, so we've got a lot of bases covered. There's still some items that need to get written or clarified. There's a fair amount of documentation in front of us that provides an understanding more so than the typical application. So with that, I guess I would ask for a motion for a decision.
Do we need to close the public hearing first?
No, I think we're gonna, well, so we're at the point, yes, we will close the public hearing because we're not expecting any new information. And at this point with the discussion, we're not gonna ask for any new information, I guess is what I should ask you guys first.
We asked for legal to help us with the final
Let's make the motion.
motion. Okay.
To do just that.
Okay. I'll make a motion to draft a decision to grant the approval for the property located at 2 Plum Island, based on the proposed special considerations that have been submitted and with help from our legal team.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Right, is there any debate or discussion? So I would add to that, that we will ask you to draft a favorable decision that includes specifically the less determination considerations that were drafted and provided to us. You can include the comparison evaluations with that. The legal standard, I think, does not need to be included in the decision, but it can be noted as it was provided. But I think the basis of what we're providing as less detrimental should be in there, either attached or by word, I guess is what I'm saying. Okay. Is there any other items of understanding that we'd like to get to? No? So with that, we have a motion to draft a favorable decision by town council for this project. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And so, Mr. Chair, I have 2 questions.
Yep.
First is, you didn't close the public hearing. So that's fine, you can close it now. You could also, and some boards choose to do this, keep the public hearing open, which would allow you to engage with the applicant and elicit or solicit additional information should you need it as you're working through a decision.
So
That's up to you.
as things have happened in the past, things never seem to be over until they're over. And so we have traditionally kept the public hearing open until the last minute of the decision. I think in this case, for the number of times you've been before us and the number of documentation that you have provided, I don't feel the need that you're gonna change anything, because we probably wouldn't find that favorable, but, is there any issue with closing the public hearing? We don't have any other questions, we're not expecting any other documentation? Okay, so we will close the public hearing at this time.
And so, as you proceed to a motion on that, and before you proceed to a motion, this is my second point, I would suggest if you're going to do that you get authorization. Do you meet bi-weekly or monthly? That's what I
We meet
thought.
monthly and then by special occasion.
Okay. So, if you're not meeting within the next 14 days, I would suggest if you're closing the hearing, that you just get authorization. It's not a special permit, it's a finding, but just get express authorization from the applicant to extend any applicable deadline beyond your next meeting to give you an opportunity to review and act on your decision at the next meeting.
Okay.
Can I just get clarity on what the vote was for here? I'm afraid to even ask because it sounded pretty good. Is the vote I vote to approve this, subject to us finalizing the decision to our satisfaction?
We have asked for a favorable motion to be
Yes.
drafted. We haven't taken the final vote,
Okay,
but we're not,
We just want to review the draft and
Yep.
look at everything.
and make sure the language is appropriate, and then vote on that as the document that we're voting on.
I think that's totally reasonable. I think it makes sense. I think it's good legal advice. I'm thinking of what I'm going to tell the Conservation Commission. So I'm going to tell them that you asked for a favorable decision to be drafted by council. All indications are that if that draft comes out covering all the issues that we discussed today, that we're expecting the vote will be consistent with that, and we're going to end up, the commission needs to be comfortable that we're not continuing to tweak things and that they're not voting on a project that's not happening anyways, you know what I'm getting?
Yeah, you
Yes.
can report as long as you don't change anything, that nothing is gonna change on our side,
Okay.
because we have the document, well-presented documentation.
Okay.
Thank you, by you, for this.
Okay, I think that sounds good.
Okay, so can we have your consent that we're gonna extend past 14 days? As soon as the draft is ready, then I guess I would appreciate getting a copy to preview. If we then send it back to you and we finalize it, it will be distributed to the other members before the meeting so that they can read it and be prepared at the meeting to discuss it.
Yeah, so we can certainly prepare a draft in advance, have it circulated. Only thing we can't do is we can't solicit feedback from individual members, make changes, and then send it back to you outside of an open meeting. But we can, if you do get changes back to us and you want those changes made, you can post it. Do you have any objection to sharing that decision, that draft decision with the applicant?
No.
I typically recommend it in the event that we're missing something or something's misstated, better to have it caught before it gets finalized. So we would send it to the board, we would simultaneously send it to Jeff for review, and we'll plan to do that usually at least a week before whatever your next meeting might be, maybe even further in advance than that. I'm not sure what the meeting date is.
October 16th.
Okay, plenty of time.
Good.
And I'm sorry, are you planning to are you gonna vote on closing the hearing tonight? I just want to be clear about the extension that you're then asking for, but,
Yeah, we're gonna
Yeah.
vote to close the hearing.
okay.
Is there a motion to add?
Motion to close the hearing. Public
Second.
hearing.
All in favor? Aye.
Okay, thank you. So are you asking for an extension of the time to finalize the decision? Is that the request?
Right, I mean, I'm suggesting it out of an abundance of caution because they haven't voted, so technically we're not on the clock until they vote to actually draft that decision and file it within 14 days with the town clerk's office. But they did take a vote to authorize the preparing of the decision,
Right.
so I just don't want to find ourselves in a situation where, not that you would claim constructive approval as you're about to get your approval with conditions, but just want to be safe.
Yeah, I mean, the applicant consents to the extension of time. So the duration between now and October 16th could be added to whatever time you would otherwise have. And I can send an email to Chrissy, maybe I'll work on the language with you just so that we're on the same page. And we'll confirm that extension in writing for the record. Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Congratulations.
So we're drafting a normal decision and then sending it to town council for their revision and review.
No, I'd like them to draft it as a whole.
I think so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good work.
Yep, good seeing you.
Let's go.
Okay. Number 2. Other general business, 2-8, Old Point Road, Sunset Club. Discussion on minor changes, modifications to ZBA previously approved pavilion structure site plan submitted to the planning board. Next meeting hearing date is Thursday, October. So, that's it.
Alrighty.
All right, Steve Sawyer from Lennium here on behalf of Cottage,
Sunset?
yeah, Sunset Club. Vincent Godin wasn't available to make it tonight, so I'm popped in to help out.
Let's be clear, you're right across the street, is that correct?
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
want to get the neighborhood.
Yeah, in the neighborhood. So so the question is whether it's actually changed. So my understanding that I did review, I don't know if anyone took a chance to review the deliberations from, I don't know, a year back, December 21st of 2023, to refresh your memory. But so originally, the thought was the building was going to turn 90 degrees when he came in, and as part of that deliberation, it was discussed about rotating at 90 degrees. And then, as part of that deliberation, Vincent had mentioned about to protect the sun from shining in, that this gable end of the roof would be enclosed. And it seemed like there was extensive deliberation in that the board was understanding that this portion of the gable ends were going to be enclosed as part of that rotating 90 degrees. The only thing is, I think it was on item 6 of the decision, it says that the sides should remain open at all times. And I guess if, splitting hairs, this is actually part of the roof. It's this little triangular piece is in definition is the gable under the roof. So it's really not a wall, but there was just consideration from the planning board. They said, okay, was the zoning board understanding that these ends were to be enclosed?
Yeah, I think after reviewing the tape, it was still under discussion that we would like to see a a picture of it.
Oh, okay.
Or, you know, if you go back and, it's like we would like to see what it would look like.
So, so there are, these Photoshop renderings have been provided to the planning board as part of the pavilion structure. And I believe that they were happy with the renderings as provided, but they want a clarification. Okay, as part of that ZBA decision, as the gable end part of that decision, and if not, it needs to be for them to act on it.
And then was there number 2 that there were some slightly different site containers or?
I don't believe, he didn't change, no, the site portion, as far as on the site, I believe all those items were part of the ZBA findings. So that was they had added the merch shack, and then also the storage containers here. I think I believe that was in the original zoning board site plan, those additional mobile structures, or mobile trailers. So I think I believe the only item was the gable ends of the building that differed from the plan that was presented at the ZBA.
Not having the original plan in front of us. Does anybody have it? No?
Too long ago.
I thought that was one of the items, but I do recall talking about rotating it so that there was more of a structure to see, and that, again, as a gateway intersection, that you had something recognizable with a face. And I think I even said something beyond my bounds by saying that maybe there would be a good place to put a sign, but I did. Yeah, I did. So I'm not going to say it again.
Yeah.
But, so that was part of the discussion.
What is
And-
that material that's that's filling the gable?
That would be like a barn board, some sort of wood material.
Is the gable
And the
structure?
and the truss would be on the outside, so you'd see the truss structure on the outside, and then
Some detail.
the barn board, to give it some detail on the end, and then the barn board would be backing it.
And so one is for sun protection, and 2, where's your lighting on site?
So as part of the structure, I think there is some downlighting inside underneath the downlighting hung from the rafters. We did provide, I think, as part of the submission, there was an updated lighting plan. Then also there's some uplighting that's tucked in that shines up on the roof underneath. And then as far as the site lighting, it's just lighted bollards throughout, small 2.5, 3 foot high lighted bollards throughout the property.
And we had asked for a shadow study, remember, that the pavilion wasn't going to cast shadows on neighbors, this being a second larger structure. Thank you, Chrissy.
Yeah, and one other thing too, we discussed was the select board, were they aware of the new situation based on the licensing for the liquor license based on this new structure? You guys said you were going to revisit the site plan with the selectmen, just to make sure that the license was okay with the new building.
I know right now we're currently before the planning board for the
Okay.
site plan review. I can't speak, I'm not sure if Vincent's gone back to the select
Just to make
board.
sure it was, everything was, they're kind of okay with the building there,
Yeah.
the liquor license.
I know as far as the occupation and the license, there's no additional seating as part of this. It's just to provide cover during extremely hot weather or inclement weather or rain.
You have to go before the select board once a year to get your license, your particular license updated, right?
I believe so. I have to defer to.
This was
Vincent on
March
that.
of 2024. I think they do that in the yeah.
November.
Is that when it's done? So if we approved this in March of '24, they would have brought this before the select board or had the opportunity to have this before the select board in November if the select board then asked about what they were doing with their license.
So maybe, I have no direct knowledge, what I know is that once you have obtained a liquor license, you're entitled to renewals as a matter of course, so long as you submit a renewal application in the month of November for the ensuing calendar year. If you're making no changes, it's virtually a rubber stamp by the select board. If you're making modifications, you have to modify the licensed premises as they're defined, then you would need to complete a licensed premises modification form and file it with the ABCC.
So as part of this had lights to provide some light under, and then closing the gable would not allow that light to spill out or be seen, and would keep the lighting really low and on the ground. And so enclosing the gable, I'm not 100% sure what you said, but I would find it more favorable in terms of the lighting to enclose the gable and have the light be on the ground and not be bright up here inside the rafters as you're driving in to see it.
I understand your point about the light, but I was surprised to see the renderings with the enclosed gable, because that's not what I was expecting, and nor what we saw during any of the other previous drawings.
This is what they were.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is the
so-
structure there.
It wasn't
And-
site-specific, but it was
Yeah.
just from the building company.
And even now, still, the technical drawings are still not showing it enclosed. So to me, to see the renderings, I was surprised. And I think, quite frankly, aesthetically and massing, and how it is viewed from the neighborhood is quite different, in my opinion. You're no longer seeing through the structure now. You're just seeing through.
I don't know if you'd actually see through it anyway. If this was open driving down, you'd probably be looking at the underside of the back of the roof.
Well, I mean, I think you
Yeah.
can see it from the lower right hand, what it would look like if you're heading off the islands. You're seeing through to the marsh, you're seeing through to the sunset, which is the Sunset Club's whole concept. It's to see, through. So to me, I was surprised to see this enclosed. I wasn't expecting that. My opinion is it is quite different. Open to other people's opinions. And yeah, again, I mean, these technical drawings even the most recent ones are still not showing it enclosed.
It's 10
So the submission is sort of not exactly accurate either. We're seeing one thing on the renderings with something else on the drawings.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the timber company, it's not a typical situation, and that's, I guess the prefab timber that comes doesn't have that backing on it. That's something you'd add in the field to it, after the timber frame structure is built.
Yeah.
Did I miss why you wanted to do that? Did you say why?
Well, I believe so. So during that, I did watch the deliberation. There was a fair amount of, actually extensive discussion about that. And I think, number one, the ZBA did not, okay, you're driving on, we don't want to be looking at shed roof, or not the gable, the shed portion of the roof. So that, when it was turned, I did, Vincent did say, well, as part of this, we do need to, we do need to shade, we need to provide shade, because what's going to happen, the afternoon sun beating in there, and there was a fair amount of discussion about, okay, with that, we're talking about, we want to close in that gable end, and it went on for quite a while, and I guess was there any?
And I think that's where we were talking about, we'd like to see a rendering
Yeah.
of it. And that was a
Yeah.
comment from Martha.
Okay.
So the prevailing wind and weather is from the west, and the intent of the pavilion is also to provide rain coverage. So it does provide some additional coverage at the open gable deck. It's 10 feet, or the height of a basketball rim, to that plane of a roof that's open on the sides. So that's a person that's me and a half studio or
Yeah, no, I understand. I just, we've spent so much time on the site across the street,
I see that.
that I want to make sure we're paying attention to this side of the street as well, and the renderings are a little jarring in my opinion. This is my opinion.
Yeah.
It-
Want to see a rendering of that
But I do
downtown?
think for the neighborhood, in
Yeah.
what we review for zoning,
Well,
which is.
there actually was,
interesting.
so he did have one done, the typical rendering that Rob Leanna does, but, which, the planning board, they wanted something more, I guess, more, I guess, a Photoshop rendering just to see what's
Yeah,
actually gonna be.
something.
But this, actually, when, in looking at this, so you have, you can see the hip roof building there, in these buildings, and the sign, in the peak of, in the gable into this. This is actually, I was actually impressed how close it was, how close they were together. We did have this rendering done. It kind of brings out, everything's much more bold than the photograph. Unfortunately, this photograph is a little grainy. It's probably wasn't meant to be blown up.
We can use our imaginations.
And I guess one thing is when you're driving in,
Want to see a rendering?
yeah, when you're driving in, you can barely, as you're coming down.
I think it's true, to see a comparison without that building, I think it's a big difference. I think, this is a solid building now that we're seeing in this rendering, and I think what we were proposing was a open pavilion. So in my opinion, it is different for the neighborhood, it is blocking views, it does appear more of a mass than it did before. Again, I'm open to what other people obviously have to
Well,
say, but.
I do think that turning it so that as you, again, the gateway, as you drive onto Plum Island, you're looking at less of a mass. You're
Yeah,
not
no,
just looking at a flat roof.
Absolutely agree with that, which I
And-
think is, right,
Yep.
a good
And
change.
It's total, where's the total height? The total height, is 22 feet, 2 inches to the ridge. So 22 feet, 2 inches compared to 34 feet to the new project that's right next door.
Eric, are you reading that from the ZBA's decision or from the?
I'm reading it from these technical drawings that are here.
Okay, Steve, is that the correct height?
that is correct, I guess.
Yeah. I think that, if I might, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think the planning board's question that, in this asking the applicant to come to the ZBA was to make sure that your decision was not inconsistent with what's being proposed with the planning board right now.
Right.
So I think those appendices or addendums that show the open gable was the primary concern. That might be a modification that the applicant's requesting, but
Yes, and so,
the planning board doesn't want to approve something that's inconsistent with your approval.
and we appreciate that. And so, one of the things before us is that in our decisions, we had stated that changes needed to come back before us. And then not for this decision, but recently, we also added the sentence that the minor changes can be approved at a meeting. And if we felt that they were major changes, then we would ask or state that the applicant needed to go back and re-advertise and reopen the project because the changes were so great. So one of the things to decide is whether it's minimum or major in terms of the change, and then secondly, to act from there. I think there was some discussion previously about it, whether we actually didn't quite follow up or the applicant didn't quite come back. And so now we're at this point because it was assumed and written up to be open, and then we had discussed or mentioned it being closed. I don't find it that detrimental to be closed. I understand about it being open and more light going through it, but it is, the purpose of it is to provide weather protection in terms of its use, or its intended use to do what it's supposed to do. I'm just happy that it's turned sideways and that it seems better presentation as you drive on with a new building here and a somewhat matching building here as best we could do without actually having design considerations for this very important location on the island.
And I know it's not really in our purview to talk about aesthetics, but it is in our purview to talk about something being detrimental to the neighborhood, which by that default includes visually what you're looking at too, I think. And it's not just that, I think it's the massing too. I mean, already the structure, I think, was going to look a bit out of place, as it was with the gables open. You know, it's a bit more Adirondack campsite versus Palm Island Beach, I think. But, you know, I think we were sort of there, right, with the open rafters. And
That's what was presented previously.
the open rafters was
Yeah.
presented. We never saw anything that showed the gable ends closed. So, you know, fully understanding aesthetics is not in our, specifically, I guess, you know, in terms of color and things like that, but in terms of massing, in terms of views, that I think is in our purview.
Well, the ground plane isn't changing. The sides cannot, for our decision, cannot be enclosed or even draped.
Yep.
So that it kind of sort of morphs into something else that it wasn't supposed to be. So really, it's still gonna function exactly the same in terms of use. Now, you know, it is aesthetics, and we did look at, somewhere in there. We did look at the shadow studies so that it wasn't in terms of the day casting shadows
Yeah.
or great shadows off the property. It's casting shadows into the parking lot and no more. And so in that way, it's not detrimental to a neighbor who is next to the parking lot and that they would all of a sudden find this bulk there.
I mean, there's other proposed options. Maybe it's a translucent panel where
I wonder
you're
if
not getting direct sun, you're not getting rain, but yet you're seeing sky through it, and you're seeing.
Let me ask if it might not be more simple, that we've already decided that. I think that the way the applicant presented it was best. He said the question is the gable end part of the side? If it's part of the side, and we already decided side, that they gotta be open. Mr. Chairman just quoted that all the sides have to be open. If it's not part of the side and it's part of the roof, then that's a different story. But if he's enclosing one of the sides, then we've gotta somehow reopen it and redo our decision. If it's part of the roof, then that's a different question. So maybe that's a way to look at it to resolve it.
And I believe the definition of this triangular piece is the gable end of the roof. It is, I think if you look at the definition.
At my house, there's a bedroom in there, it's a cape, and that's the side of my house, so.
Yeah.
I think the size we're up to.
When is a wall?
Yeah.
When is a wall
well,
a roof?
I'm just more of what was presented,
Yeah.
was it was open. Like, no matter what we talked about, the documentation that backs up the submittal and the
Yeah, the
application,
I get it.
it was open. And like I said, still right now, it's partially being
Some of it-
represented as open to. And
Yeah.
I understand these shop drawings are coming from the manufacturer, right, who's gonna
Yeah.
fabricate it and deliver it. So I get it, but yet we're still getting two different stories from the application, and so,
Maybe a rendering without the,
like I said, what are other people thinking?
I mean, I kind of agreeing with you, like, I'd like to see it without it and see what it looks like. You know, because the original, what we looked at in the original meeting was no doors.
No gable ends, yeah, enclosed.
But you could see the trusses, like in
Right.
that picture
You
in
can
front of
see
you.
the
Yeah,
trusses.
That was the original
Yeah.
drawing.
I guess so, we haven't answered the, sort of what they're here for, whether it's a minor or major change. So I don't know how are we supposed to move forward with getting more information in this case? If that's what people wanna ask for.
That's a good question, and since it's the first time through it, maybe there's a little bit of a gray area. I know that we had asked Larry at one point an opinion of site plan sort of modifications in terms of what people do in the process of how things come before the planning board, of how things progress, and what might be major or sort of a minor adjustment that was asked for. We typically should have, as things get recorded on deeds, and we're trying to, in our decisions, grant something, and that something should be exact and not iffy. And we certainly don't like when people come before us and sort of fish for something and try to feel us out and think they're gonna get approval, and then they're gonna go figure it out and change everything, and then that's not what we had our debate, discussion on. And so the language is in there to try to make sure we can figure things out, but we can also be accommodating to residents in terms of minor changes and not run them through a whole other procedure if we don't really have to, and be fair about it and be consistent about it is what we need to do. So,
My opinion would be a minor change, but we should think about what it would look like without, because that's what we saw in the original plan.
Well, and based on some of the original conversation too, is I don't know if we totally understand the site plan and what's being proposed as temporary versus permanent, but I don't think we're worried about it. I just think documentation wise, we need to have a plan that shows this is what's included in our square footage that
From the video, that was determined that they were all removable, because if they weren't removable, they had to go on pilings to be out of the flood zone. So they were deemed to be removable,
the whole structure.
those other structures.
Oh, these
Yeah.
other structures?
Yeah, that's what she was talking about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, basically that's the whole basis, the mobile kitchen and the existing enclosed restaurant was just a renovation to the existing garage. That's the only basis for that being allowed to be on grade there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're not moving, they're full of kitchens working in there and store, refrigerators and,
But there's.
but if that's how it's classified,
So
I'm not
what-
trying to change that.
What are they hooked
It's
up to?
just-
Are they like propane and electric? Is
Yeah,
that,
it's just-
there's no plumbing to them, is
Oh, there
there?
Oh, no,
has to
so-
be, it's a full working kitchen.
But yeah, but it is, it's a,
So it's a technicality of
yeah.
definition.
yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, that's fine. I think it would just be helpful to have a plan, just like this documentation. We always try to have the documentation that matches what the presentation is and what we're approving. And I think it would just be helpful
Okay.
to understand that.
Let's take one step at a time here.
Yeah.
If I could propose that this could be a considered a minor change that we can discuss and debate and vote on without having to reopen the public. Does that sound fair?
I think that sounds
It's not
That sounds great,
changing in
yeah.
size,
Yeah.
shape, or
Yeah.
location.
Yeah.
It's been presented before, it's been presented to the planning board. It's not a different use, and so there's no debate on that.
Yep.
Yes, correct. I
Okay.
think we're all agreed on that.
So we'll agree that this is a minor, but it sounds like there's another step in order to figure out where we're going with it. So, one is that we have the current site plan that has been updated and is before the planning board, and that we would, Kristen and Larry, do we know if there's any changes from the planning board that are being suggested or proposed?
From the submission Steve gave you most recently?
Yes.
I don't believe so.
Okay. So
But
we
I don't know if it may differ in other ways from your decision.
So, I don't think that the containers on site, that we're gonna propose moving them or even have a discussion about their location.
No.
So, the only thing really before us tonight is whether the gable end is closed or not. And that's what we need to make a decision or clarification on.
If that site plan matches the site plan that was used in your original decision, then there's no change. But
Right.
if there are changes,
If there are changes,
I
then
would just update the reference to site plan.
as Yes, and so that was, Michelle did say that, and I think to clarify what I think you were saying is that we would like the site plan, we would like the right rendering, we would ask if this is being presented as the technical structure, that we note that this is a typical submittal that doesn't 100% reflect the actual pavilion to be built because the sides will be enclosed, and we need a note on it so that our,
Yeah, I thought I had noted that on,
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
No, gable end to be enclosed. So what we're after is, in order to make our revision to accept the revisions via minimal, declaring it a minimal revision, we would like just to make sure that the documentation of the application is complete, and we don't have 100
Okay.
different things, and we're not relating back to something old, and we have the old, but we'd like to make a new decision so that it's just.
an updated site plan, clarification on the, as far as the chalk drawing, as far, probably,
Right.
we could come up with, or detail what material is backing it. My understanding is barn board, okay, is it barn, what type, is it a shiplap or whatever, I'll get that from Vincent.
And I think the rendering shows the gables and and shows the trusses, and one rendering shows the gable, then that's all that's before us to make the decision. That sounds clear?
So, to be clear, you're asking for a rendering with the gable ends closed.
Well, we have that.
We have that.
We're going by that, not one on the technical
So
drawings. I see it, yes.
Right, so now they just have to take that and maybe erase the cream color and show the truss beyond, and now we have open and closed.
Yep.
Okay.
Then we can make a decision.
Okay, so you'd like a separate set of renderings with the ends open?
Yes, and then everybody knows, for the record, what we made our minimal decision on,
Okay,
and we can go forward.
all right,
Does that make sense?
makes sense.
Motion?
Sure, make a motion.
I make a motion to continue the meeting till October 16th, 7:30, Town Hall, with the addition of new renderings and new site plans.
Excellent. Is there a
Second.
Yep, all in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for helping us walk through that.
Technically, I'm here.
Oh, you're not?
Casey, you want to take that back to make sure that you,
The never ending
that one?
continue.
Does that matter as long as it's, like, I don't even remember who voted on the original. I remember the discussion, I remember.
You weren't here.
You were not here.
I signed it.
Yeah.
Michelle's on that one.
Oh, she's got a problem.
Well,
Yeah, thank you on
I'm not
that.
here next
Yeah.
week,
Those are never easy to do.
but it'll be up to you guys.
Just the whole.
That'll talk to
Can Jack watch the video?
legal counsel. Well, we're all here now, this is a change. I'll
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
if I have to watch the video,
Let everyone know one time I wasn't there.
but I like the ones that I'm in better than the ones I'm not in, just tell me.
It's not that long, to be honest with you, because it's like, it's the last part of the meeting.
What was the date on it?
It's in the email. Oh, here it is, here, take this.
What was it originally, a special permit?
Yeah,
Yes.
that was the email?
I just read it.
Hey, can you see the bottom, the blue, the hyperlink?
They approved this in March 2024.
Board membership was
I
that?
think I
Oh,
picked
yeah, we
it.
have that email.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's on the email, you just go back to your email and click on it.
Oh, I have this? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's easy.
What do we close? We have to close this one.
Is there any other business on the agenda for us?
No.
But it may be RH3.
Anybody have any other agenda business?
No. Next meeting here today.
So we're on the third Thursday, is October 16th, you just said?
Because you're treating it like it's administrative, you don't really need it.
Sure is, okay.
Might be wise to do it. I see it all, like with insubstantial changes to 40B developments. The law says doesn't review, you don't even need a written
Okay.
decision. Or it's just written.
All right.
Make a motion to close the meeting?
Yes.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's closed, thank you.